What is the condition of free speech in America? I'm Sanford Unger, Director of the Free Speech Project at Georgetown University, and on this video series, Speaking Freely, we'll be talking to thought leaders and major players in the free speech drama unfolding in this country. Today, Arthur Spitzer, the legal director of the American Civil Liberties Union of the District of Columbia, joins us in the studio. We're talking today with Art Spitzer, the legal director of the American Civil Liberties Union, or ACLU, of the District of Columbia. Art, I wanted us especially to focus during this conversation on a very unusual lawsuit that you have brought against the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority, which has to do with the advertisements that they will accept. Maybe you could give us a little bit of background about that for a start.
Sure. So the DC metro system, the subway system, opened in the mid-70s here, and from the time it opened until late 2015, they had a fairly wide-open advertising policy. There are advertising posters in stations and placards in the trains and on buses, and they largely took whatever they were paid for. And there were some situations in which they refused ads. There was one in the early 1980s in which they refused an ad that was a photo montage that showed President Reagan all dressed up nicely for a dinner, apparently pointing and making fun of a bunch of homeless people, and they rejected it on the ground that it was false because it wasn't a real picture, and there was a lawsuit about that, and it went up to the Court of Appeals, and a fabulous panel of judges Bork and Ken Starr and Scalia on the DC circuit unanimously ruled that this violated the First Amendment rights of the advertisers.
So that the poster of Reagan was okay?
It was that there's no such thing as false political advertising, right, and that Metro had created an open forum for advertising. And Metro took that decision to heart, and for the next 15, 20 years, they pretty much allowed all kinds of political advertising.
Anything could be.
They had a ban on alcohol and cigarettes, alcohol and tobacco. And of course, they had a ban, which makes perfect sense, against advocating illegal activities. You couldn't say, get your cocaine at the corner of 7th and H. But, and they made people put a thing at the bottom saying, this ad is the view of the sponsor and not the view of the Metropolitan Transit Authority, which is great. But then a time came in 2015 when they were asked to accept an ad that they didn't want to accept, and so they changed their policy in order to prevent that ad from going up, and they said we're no longer an open forum, and we're no longer going to allow issue ads, and that's not the language of the regulation. The regulation actually has 14 different points and all the kinds of advertising, but the main ones are ads about public issues on which people disagree and ads that attempt to influence public policy. And since then, they've rejected a bunch of ads from a variety of organizations. And we were not happy with this policy when they changed it. We've sort of been looking for the right case to challenge it, a test case. And the case came together earlier this year. They rejected an ad by the American Civil Liberties Union. We wanted to post the national ACLU.
They should have known better.
Well, maybe so. The ACLU wanted to post an ad that had the text of the First Amendment in English and Spanish and Arabic, the three languages side by side on a single poster. And they decided, for reasons they haven't explained yet, that this was too political, this was unacceptable to them. They also then rejected an ad, a series of ads by PETA, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, encouraging people to eat a vegan diet. They had a poster of a pig, and the pig was saying, the caption said, "I'm me, not meat. Go vegan." And they had another poster of a soldier, you know, wearing camouflage sort of uniform, saying, "When I signed up for the Army, I didn't think I was going to be told to stab goats," protesting what apparently goes on in some Army training when people are taught to use their bayonets on live animals so they really understand what they're doing. Debatable whether this is a good thing or a bad thing, but PETA certainly has a point of view that we think they're entitled to express. They then also rejected an ad for an organization called Carafem, which is a women's health provider that specifically provides what's called the 10-week after pill, which is a medical abortion as opposed to a surgical abortion. You take these two pills. This is a government-approved drug, and they cause a miscarriage. It's relatively quick. It's much less invasive than surgery, and the ad simply showed a picture of a pill and said the 10-week after pill, safe, private, inexpensive. I don't think I'm quoting it exactly, but that was the gist of it. You know, and had the telephone number and the website for Carafem. They rejected that because it had something to do with abortion, which is controversial. And then finally, they accepted an ad by a company called Milo Worldwide, LLC, which is a company set up by Milo Yiannopoulos, to advertise his new book. A controversial, provocative...
far-right speaker, I think, is what most people call
I think most people would say that. He published a book on the 4th of July called Dangerous. It's about what he believes, and it has a chapter about why blacks hate me, why feminists hate me, why pro-choice people hate me, you know, all the different issues that he has spoken out on.
Just to be clear, why they hate him.
Why they hate, well, the chapters are why they hate me. Of course, what they hate are his positions, his ideas, and the fact that he is so outspoken and provocative about them. And I think it's fair to say that he relishes being controversial and provocative. He
generally gets invited to give speeches that he never has to give.
Often. That's right. But he's published this book. It's a serious book. It's a book about ideas. And the advertisement simply showed his face and the title of the book, Dangerous. And it said, these advertisements were going to go up before the publication date. They said pre-order now, so you could go to Amazon.
And they accepted that ad.
And they accepted the ad because it's just an ad for a book. And I saw an ad for a book on the subway yesterday. They've taken many ads for books. There was nothing in the ad that was political or controversial, unless you consider his face by itself to be controversial, which apparently some people did.
And he has said some very controversial things that we don't need to get into here, but
absolutely true.
Many people objected to.
And so do many other people say controversial things, although he makes a point of being provocative. But the ads went up, and Metro started getting tweets mostly, and a couple of emails from people who found it objectionable that he was allowed to advertise his book because they think he's a hateful.
They don't like him.
They don't like him. And after about a day of getting these tweets, and there weren't that many, there were only fewer than a dozen, Metro very quickly decided that these ads were unacceptable and ordered them to be immediately taken down, which they were. And so we had these 4 examples coming together fairly close in time.
Not exactly 4 plaintiffs you would expect to find in the same room.
Well, that's right, and they haven't yet been in the same room. They've been on the phone and email together, and maybe if there's a court hearing, they'll show up in the same room. But of course, each of them had to think about, do we want to be associated with these others in a lawsuit? we, the ACLU, were very enthusiastic about getting them together because we thought that would present a particularly good vehicle for public education about how freedom of speech has to protect everybody or it's not going to protect anybody. Right. And people who say, how can you represent Milo Yiannopoulos? Well, we can say, it doesn't always work, but we can say to them, you know, but other people are saying to us, how can you represent an organization that's causing abortions, which we think is, which some people think is murder? You know, not to me. I mean, to me, the abortion pill is not a controversial thing, but to millions of Americans,
it is.
It's murder.
That's right.
And so I think I hope it's useful to the public, and I think it has been a useful vehicle to try to explain to people that the same rule is preventing right. speech by one and the other.
So your premise here, maybe not in legal language, is that the metro system, the public transportation system, is in no position to say what views should be exposed to the public or not.
Right. So to use a legal phrase, but not a difficult one, we call it viewpoint neutrality.
Right.
And the courts have said, the Supreme Court has said, that the most clear rule when it comes to speech in a government forum is that the government can't discriminate based on the viewpoint expressed
right.
by the speaker.
And whoever's in power at any particular time. This
That's
could
right.
change from one
very obviously.
year to
I mean, the Trump administration might be happy to have Milo Yiannopoulos' speech and not Carafem's speech.
Right.
And the Obama administration, perhaps the other way. And so we think it's an extremely important principle, this principle of viewpoint neutrality or non-discrimination. There can be rules, and especially in a place like Metro, which is not Lafayette Park, it's not a public
right.
sidewalk, it's a more limited kind of a public forum, there can be some rules. And so we haven't challenged Metro's rule against cigarette advertising. They've actually changed their rule on alcohol. They allow it now because they were losing a lot of revenue by cutting back on ads, and they decided they needed revenue, so they decided alcohol is now okay. But Metro can have categories of things
yes.
that it doesn't accept advertising for.
Do you have any insight into how they make these decisions, what they're going to permit and what they're going to
do? So at the first level, they have a commercial advertising agency that acts as their agent. It's called Outfront, and it does this work around the country. And Outfront is supposed to be the first level of screening when an ad comes in. If they think it's just fine, they accept it. And that's what they did with the Milo Yiannopoulos ad. If they think it's, you know, on the border, maybe covered by the policy, then they're supposed to kick it up to Metro itself. And Metro has a process, there's a committee of some sort, we don't really know the details yet, that looks at
but
this.
But you might find out eventually.
I think we will find out, and eventually the decision is made by someone at an executive level below the general manager, yes or no. And the problem, I think, is not, from what we know so far, the problem is not so much that there isn't a reasonable good faith effort made to apply these guidelines, but that the guidelines themselves are really inherently arbitrary and therefore viewpoint discriminatory, because advertisements that sort of coincide with mainstream views are not going to be viewed as controversial or political or issue. And so one example that we used in the lawsuit is there was an advertisement for a local restaurant that showed a very delicious looking plate of food, and the caption on the advertisement was "Porkadice found." It's a pork dish.
Paradise.
As in paradise found. Porkadice found.
Right.
Obviously conveying the message that pork is delicious and good to eat, and you should come to our restaurant and have this delicious pork dish, viewed as not issue-oriented at all. But Pete's ad of a pig saying, "Don't eat me," was viewed as political and issue-oriented, but it's two sides of the same thing, really.
Right.
And most people, including me, if I just happened to see the restaurant ad without being focused on it, wouldn't view that as a political statement.
Right.
But of course, when you think about it, when you especially when you contrast it with PETA's ad, you can see that it has that viewpoint.
Right. What could possibly be the objection to an ad or a poster quoting the First Amendment?
Well, I don't want to make the other side's argument especially, but I think what their view is that showing it in English and Spanish and Arabic was making a statement of some sort.
By choice of languages, you mean?
By choice of languages, I think.
So it should be
that
in more languages or other languages?
Or only English.
I see.
We don't know what would have happened if we had submitted an ad only with the text of the First Amendment in English. Would they have viewed that as issue-oriented, and perhaps in the context of what's going on politically, perhaps they would have said that's issue-oriented.
That does seem surprising, since many people on all political sides cite the First Amendment as their guarantee of their right to speak on whatever subject it might be.
Sure. Of course, there are some people who don't like the First Amendment. There are people who think hate speech should be banned. Right. There are people who think Milo Yiannopoulos' speech should be banned.
Well, I think most of those people say they're in favor of free speech, but not the particular speech that bothers them.
Well, of course, that's right.
So
that's right.
First Amendment's fine up to the edge of what...
Well, and as you know, there are serious people who have called on the government to amend the First Amendment to carve out political campaign finance and related speech, who think we need to give the government the ability to ban certain people from speaking about elections.
Right.
They don't like the First Amendment, or at least they don't like the way the Supreme Court has interpreted it. They would say it means everything except what they don't like.
One brief digression here. Is this unique to Washington, this kind of dispute? Are there other cities where the transit systems have gone through a similar controversy?
Yes, in many places, and many transit systems have adopted rules more or less similar to what WMATA has adopted here, and there have been lawsuits in a bunch of other places too.
WMATA being Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority.
Right.
So do you know offhand what some of those cities are where speech is either freer or more restricted on the public transportation systems?
So every system has a slightly different set of rules,
right.
but there's been litigation over these kinds of issues in New York, in Seattle, in some town in California, and it was not San Francisco or Los Angeles, some other city in California.
Because it does seem odd.
Cleveland, I think.
I mean, long live the federal system, but it does seem odd that what's considered appropriate would be different.
Yeah.
It's an interesting application of community standards. The First Amendment might be okay in Detroit, but not in Washington or what have you.
And case in point, the very same ad for Milo Yiannopoulos' book was accepted and posted in the Chicago transit system and in the New York Metropolitan Transit Authority, in the New York subways.
And are his sales better in those cities? Do you?
I haven't seen any figures about that. The book apparently has sold pretty well. It was on bestseller lists for several weeks. Yeah.
Right. So is part of the argument here that if the metro system can decide today that these 4 things are objectionable, or 3 were objectionable, and 4th one became objectionable because of public pressure, that this is the proverbial slippery slope, and that next year it'll be 4 more or 8 more or who knows how many?
No, the Metro has been rejecting ads since it changed its policy, and I'm sure they will continue to reject ads unless our lawsuit makes them change their policy. And it is, as we were saying a minute ago, we think inherently arbitrary in some ways. There's no, I mean, here's another example. If you take the subway to the Pentagon station here in D.C., you'll pretty much always see ads by defense contractors for the latest hardware that they're trying to sell to the Pentagon.
Right.
We have pictures that we put in the lawsuit of ads for, for a particular jet fighter. And it said, I don't remember the words, but it basically said, we can accomplish the mission with this jet fighter. Well, that particular fighter is actually a very controversial fighter. It has flunked repeatedly in testing. Many members of Congress have called for that whole program to be terminated because it's, a sink of billions of dollars that they think will never get anywhere. I'm no expert on jet fighters, so I don't have an opinion on that. But it's clear that this company is advertising to the decision makers at the Pentagon when they get on and off the subway at the Pentagon,
so in a sense,
trying to influence public policy, which is against the rules. And yet whoever was reviewing these ads, it didn't occur to them, because it's an ad by a big company for a commercial product, it didn't occur to them that we think that ad clearly violates their rules.
And in a sense, you could say that the metro system is an accomplice in promoting a particular weapons system or airplane.
Under their current rules.
Under their rules.
They are.
You would not be opposed, however.
We don't oppose that ad, but we think if the Quakers want to put up an ad at the Pentagon station that says war is not the answer, like the bumper stickers that you see on cars that they make, we think that ad should be accepted too.
Do you think it would be?
It would not be. I'm confident it would not be.
You're confident it would not be accepted.
Yeah.
So there's an ideology, albeit a hidden one,
right,
to what's accepted and what's not.
I think that's right.
An
ad for a commercial product is less obviously pushing a viewpoint.
Right.
Whereas an ad that's not for a commercial product is more obviously pushing a viewpoint. But there's obviously viewpoints behind many ads for commercial products, like the ad for this jet fighter.
Well, taking the ad with the First Amendment quoted, I suppose the NRA could say, well, fine, we'll have one with the Second Amendment.
Sure.
And you would not oppose that?
No, if they would like to be our client, we'd be delighted if they had such an ad and it was rejected.
Right. So you could have a series with the entire Bill of Rights.
Sure.
On the system. And so that raises the prospect, perhaps a desirable one, perhaps not, of the transit system as a sort of public square, a marketplace of information, where you would say, other than drugs and tobacco, things clearly not in the, don't promote the public health, you would say that's fine, that's a good way to...
better than fine. I mean, we think it's actually important.
Yes.
You know, people more and more are living in bubbles that echo their own opinions. They go to those TV networks, they go to those websites. Metro advertising is one of the few ways that you can actually reach everybody in the metropolitan area. Metro's own advertising brochures point to the fact that something like 98% of people in the Washington area are exposed to Metro advertising on a daily basis.
So that's probably more than a billboard along a public highway.
Yes. I mean, it's not only the subways, because not everyone uses the subway, but it's buses, and you stand on the sidewalk and you see the buses go by with the ads on there. So you want to reach people, you know, you're a liberal and you want to reach people who only go to Fox, you can put an ad on the Metro and you'll reach those people, and vice versa. You're a conservative and you want to reach the eggheads on the red line, the MSNBC crowd. You can put your ad on the red line and you'll reach all the people who live in Cleveland Park. So
it's an unfettered, unsubtle, in some ways, but fairly efficient system of public discussion.
It is,
of these issues.
And it's not cheap, but it's affordable. I mean, you can put up a lot of posters on Metro for less than what it would cost you to take out a full-page ad in the New York Times or the Washington Post, and reach a lot of people, and in some cases get them at a time when they are, you know, they're not at work, they're not, they're you know, they may be standing on the platform for 4 or 5 minutes waiting for a train and have the leisure to look at your ad.
Can you think of anything other than tobacco, illegal, illicit drugs? Can you think of anything that you would put in a category? What if the Ku Klux Klan wanted to have such an ad in the Washington Metro system, sort of advertising for members? Would that be all right?
Oh, I think so. I think so. I mean, that's political speech. I think in terms of commercial advertising, ads that are false and misleading can be rejected. I mean, that's the law, and that's a clear difference between commercial and political sort of advertising. You can't say, we're selling this car for $20,000 if the real price is $30,000. And you can't say this car has, you know, a 16 cubic foot trunk if it only has an 8 cubic foot trunk. Those are simple facts, and Metro can enforce that kind of rule
but then
on commercial ads.
If the Ku Klux Klan says this is and should be a white nation, white Protestant nation, or however they would say it, and evil lurks among these other people, and maybe the Ku Klux Klan is not the best example. There are some explicitly white supremacist organizations now that speak much more viciously, I think, than even the Klan. If you defend their right to put ads on a transit system, since that's what we're talking about, is this just the marketplace of ideas, or do you, in defending their right, become their accomplice the way you become the accomplice, or would be accused of being the accomplice, perhaps, of the people trying to sell the weapons system to the Pentagon?
Sure. Well, we're accused of being accomplices all the time. And I think the answer to that is it's the First Amendment that you need to accuse of being the accomplice. It's the founders of the country who didn't want to give the government the power to decide what can be said and what can't be said in a public forum. If you're the publisher of the New York Times or the Washington Post and you decide you want to reject certain ads, that's your First Amendment right, because you're not the government. And a lot of people don't really get this distinction, which is a fundamental distinction in our law.
The public versus the private.
Public versus private. But when it's the government making the decision, when the government is saying who can have a parade down Main Street, or who can have a rally on the sidewalk in front of the White House, or who can put their ads in a public transit system, or have a meeting at a public university, that's when the First Amendment cuts in and says, we can't have the government deciding what speech is okay and what speech is not okay. And I think the reason for that is really pretty obvious when you think about it, because the government has its own point of view. I mean, politicians are not some sorts of neutral people.
Right.
And if you know who's going to make the decision about what speech to ban?
And it would be,
it's not going to be the activist on the street.
Right.
It's going to be the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court or the guy in the White House. And
arguably, it would be chaos if, say, every 4 years, what's an acceptable point of view?
Well, think about what happens in other countries in
Right.
sometimes in some places. Think about, to use a cliche, George Orwell's 1984.
Sure.
We're at war with Oceania until all of a sudden we're at war with I forget the name of the other
Right.
place.
Right.
But that's exactly right. The rules would change with the administration, and your speech, which might be favored today, might all of a sudden be banned tomorrow. And it always puzzles me when radical activists, whether on the right or the left or somewhere else, are so enthusiastic to ban the speech of their opponents,
Yes.
not thinking they are not sitting in the White House or likely to anytime soon. They are not sitting on the Supreme Court or likely to be there anytime soon. Who do they think is going to make these decisions if you give the government the power to ban speech? It's their speech that's going to be banned first, very likely.
And do you see any tripwire, say, when we're talking about the Ku Klux Klan or white supremacist organizations, is there a specter where you might have to modify or condition your views a little bit because, let's say, David Duke or some representative of white supremacist organization threatens to be on the verge of power?
Well, I think the answer is no. If the people are actually going to elect David Duke to some office, I think the meaning of democracy is they get to elect him to some office. I'm not, frankly, very worried about that. I don't
because
think
you have confidence in the good
confidence
sense
in the good sense of the American people. I mean, sometimes voters make mistakes, and sometimes they have made mistakes. Hopefully our system is strong enough that it allows for the correction of those mistakes. I mean, we had a civil war.
Right.
And I hope we don't have one again, and I don't think we're, frankly, close to having one again. And, you know, at some point, of course, speech can be a true threat, and that's not protected by the First Amendment.
If there's a threat of action.
If you're actually saying to somebody, you know, here's a gun, go shoot somebody, or you know, give me your money or I'm going to shoot you. Of course, that's not protected by the First Amendment. It's hard to imagine a situation where an ad on the metro system could be a true threat or a true incitement, but in theory, something could cross that line. But something that just says, you know, we are the Klan, we stand for a return to the good old days, you know, go to www.kkk.com, that's not a threat and that's not an incitement, and I think the First Amendment would protect that.
And do you draw a line at all about sort of where law enforcement might come in here? It is something, free speech might trigger a concern for law enforcement to do something about it?
Well, law enforcement is free to pursue.
Sometimes too free.
Sometimes too free, but you know, if law enforcement is aware of some group that they think may be plotting violent and criminal acts, they can go to the meetings of that group.
Right. Of course, when it was up to J. Edgar Hoover for 48 years,
that's right.
that became a very dangerous thing.
It did, and it could. But I mean, we know from news reports. I mean, we assume the news reports are true, that law enforcement infiltrated some of the planning meetings for the inauguration protests because they wanted to know what was being planned, especially this past
year.
Inauguration,
yes,
in January 2017, and that's not unconstitutional. If there's a public meeting, police can go to it, and they can go to it in uniform or they can go to it undercover. And there are some rules. We have some statutes in D.C. in the D.C. Code about where and when the police can do that and whose approval they need. But the general rule is, if you're holding a public meeting, anyone can come, and that includes someone who might be a law enforcement officer. Right. And so if there's some ad on the subway and it triggers interest on the part of law enforcement to find out more about what that organization is doing, they can follow up on that if they want to.
Art, thank you very much. This is work on the frontiers of free speech, I think, and that is becoming more important to us all.
Well, a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. We've been discussing a First Amendment dispute between the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority and the American Civil Liberties Union with Art Spitzer, the legal director of the ACLU for the District of Columbia. To learn more about Georgetown University's Free Speech Project, visit our website. Thanks very much for watching.